to SKaffeehaus, a podcast brought to you by the Baroque music collective Solomon's Knot. This is a place where we chat to interesting people and explore ideas behind upcoming projects. Please subscribe and spread the word. And you can sign up for our newsletter at solomonsnotcollective.com to keep up to date with what we're doing next. So today Johnny has handed me the reins, and I've chosen to discuss a topic which has been simmering in my mind for a while. I'm going to be investigating the experience of singing religious music as a confidently non-religious person, chatting to director Tom Guthrie, Solomon's Knot sopranos Zoe Brookshaw and Clare Lloyd-Griffiths, and the preacher of Lincoln's Inn, the Ven Sheila Wilson.
Should we check how crunchy the biscuits sound on the mics?
I'd like to start by saying that I'm really hoping this conversation is taken simply in the spirit of open discussion and questioning. It comes with utmost respect for those on the entire spectrum, from confidently non-believing to steadfastly devout. I've got no qualifications to ask these questions beyond the fact that I've accidentally spent 2 decades singing mostly religious repertoire, and I'm curious to discuss the experience of doing so. I'm hoping to invite you into some quite informal conversations, which happened in pubs, on trains, and public parks even. This means the audio might have a rather realistic quality, but I hope you'll feel welcome in this ongoing dialogue in which we mostly discover that no one has any definite answers.
I'm chatting in the ship pub. That's important that we say that, I think, because it's quite noisy, but it's pleasingly informal and atmospheric.
Yes. And dark panels, so we should say that too.
Pour yourself a glass of wine. No doubt. We're in the pub. And I'm talking to Tom Guthrie, who is a director, singer, sometimes violinist. Yeah, is that right?
I'll take it, yeah.
Yeah, and I've kind of a person that takes things off the page and puts them in space.
Oh.
You can use that.
Can you? Yeah, can I have that?
You're
Thank
really
you very
welcome.
much.
In some degree, sometimes with puppets, although the puppet thing is tricky for me because I think they're on a thin line between incredibly compelling and very beautiful and really, really sinister.
Yes.
I'm not sure about the puppets. Jury's out on the puppets. But I first met you in Dartmoor Prison.
You did.
I don't think we should say anything else about that.
No,
Let's
please
just
don't
leave
mention.
it as that was it. Tantalising, isn't it? Great. So I first met Tom in a prison, and Tom has done various things with Solomon's Knot. I don't know, certainly something recently, was helping us with the Bach motets, which we did at, is it LIFM, the London International Festival of New Music?
Do they call it that? Do they spell out the...
LIFM.
Yes.
LIFM.
Yes.
In Blackheath. And we've since sung that in Bruges, and we also did it various other places with Mahal.
Lovely, yes, nice, yes.
Program.
Yes.
And I suppose I thought of you in my quest to understand this topic of singing religious music as some degree of a non-religious person, is because I think that you've got a really kind of acute sense of stripping away artful bullshit and layers of artifice and familiarity and maybe a bit of tradition and established ways of doing things and maybe getting to the kind of human kind of crux of what are you saying and what are you trying to communicate and why are you doing this, and something quite kind of raw, I think I described it, about how
that was a great word.
How you describe things to us, and I really like that. So if you can indulge me in my explaining slightly where this topic came from. You have to indulge me because you can't go anywhere.
No.
You can drink the wine while
I can sip it, and I love listening to you.
So I was doing a concert, Beethoven Mrs. Lemons, with John Elliott, Gardner, somewhere, I can't remember where. And I had this kind of slight moment of epiphany. I feel like Zoe's going to tell me that's the wrong use of word of epiphany, but a moment of revelation where I had been worried for a while about the sense of insincerity in performing a religious piece and feeling like the text I was communicating, conveying, that I didn't believe it to any degree. So how could I communicate it without any kind of barrier, without kind of acting it or pretending? Or what was the way to put the music across, and trying to feel that my connection with the audience was really immediate. And like people often say, oh, it doesn't matter if you don't really believe, oh, I've got a slightly, loose understanding of it, or all this kind of stuff. None of that really kind of sat really right with me. No. I don't buy that. No. And so I suddenly have this revelation, and again, bear with me because I know I seem absolutely insane, but I had this sense that if I replaced the words of the Mass and the sense of there being God in any context within the Mass, if I replaced it with a sense of it being about nature, then I immediately could understand and communicate without any barrier everything I was saying. Like the sense of majesty and glory of God, all now translated, as if you will, into nature, or the sense of forgive us our sins, because we are realizing that nature is the key for everything, for us and our happiness, and the kind of key to our existence. Yet we are totally ruining it all, and the kind of big magisterial aspect of nature, and all the small tiny details and wonder and awe and consolation for sure, especially like post-pandemic, when I know for a lot of people they found kind of great solace in being in nature. And I suddenly kind of had this revelation that I was like, maybe I don't have to worry about whether I believe in God or not. Maybe I need to find my own translation of this music, and then I can just sing it with fervour, if that's, fervour can be non-religious, and put this across, thinking, this is how I'm interpreting it. And it suddenly just made me think, like, it's mad that I have spent 20 years of my life singing religious music when I am in no way religious. I'm not from that tradition at all. Yeah. It's not a world I understand. I feel quite an outsider to all that tradition.
Are you anti it a bit? I mean, do you have
I don't think I am, no. I mean, I've sung in churches for years, and I have a deep respect for the tradition and the kind of repose. Like, I love Compline more than anything. I like taking time to quietly sit in a beautiful space and just consider things. And I love the sense of doing things correctly. I love people to wear a smart suit. I love the sense of respect.
Occasion. There's a ritual.
I definitely have a great respect for it. But equally, I feel like there's a huge sense of presumed knowledge with religion that I don't have. When people say, oh yes, well obviously we'll replace the doxology with a liturgy according to the sacrament of the thing, and the glory will be at the end of the service.
Yes, on the third Sunday after Trinity.
Yes, I have no idea what you're saying. No. It's like when people don't understand things about wine.
Yes.
Or, any of those.
Yes, so there's a kind of exclusive element to it that you don't...
And I feel like I very much admired this kind of devout, religious fervour that people have, but I definitely don't have it. But yet, I spend so many hours singing religious music that I kind of feel like, why have I never really thought about it? And I kind of wondered if you, similarly, maybe you don't, I don't know where you are on the scale of considering yourself to be in no way religious to very devoutly religious, but if you ever are aware of that, or aware of a kind of uncomfortable quality, or an insincerity, or a disconnect, or a feeling of wanting to be sincere to the text, or to people's religious feeling when conveying religious text. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. No, I lost you at Beethoven.
Sure.
That's fascinating. Can I just ask you, when was the Mr. Cinemas that you did?
I can't remember.
Yeah, like 2 or 3 years ago.
No, it was like a year ago.
Oh, right, quite. So, recently, yeah. And how's it been since then? So, for instance, when we did the Baphomet text, for instance, and other religious music, once you've had that
revelation, you can't stop thinking about it.
Yes.
I'm thinking about it all the time.
Yes. And what do you mean the translating God into nature?
Translating God into nature, and also generally just trying to think. Worry maybe is an insincerity in the way I'm singing this. Like I sing in Lincoln's Inn, which is just across the way.
Yes.
And we were singing a hymn, and there was a kind of, I've got this sense of that strikes me that a lot of people agree that they love about religion is the familiarity, comfortable words. There's this bit in the service. It's called the comfortable words.
Yes. Here, what comfortable words are.
And I kind of feel like there's something in there that people love. It's like a bit of nostalgia, and it's a bit of regularity. It's the rhythms of the day. It's why people like Compline at the end of the day.
Yes, right.
But we were singing a hymn, and you know how you sing a hymn, you're getting through it, you're singing your alto harmony that no one's listening to. But the words were something really graphic about Christ on the cross.
Yes.
And I think we're way too comfortable.
Yes, we're just singing this like
it's just like it's what we do all the time. And I started to think like, actually, should we make ourselves more uncomfortable? And I remember so vividly what you said about Zing at Dim Ham, one of the motets. So you're enjoying yourselves too much. You're just reveling in the music and the notes, and like, this is quite fun, isn't it? It's quite nice music. Whereas actually, if you think more carefully about what are you trying to convey, are you trying to change the audience in any way?
Yes.
We need to be made more uncomfortable.
This is, I mean, it's
Yes,
no, it's genuinely fascinating. And can I just ask just about the nature thing? Because has it you could think about it, and does it work? I mean, does it work for you? Do you think now I can do it? No.
Because say the maths setting, perfect.
Yes.
I can translate everything.
Yes.
We did a program of Kunal before Christmas.
Yes.
It was very tricky. I mean, I spent a long time trying to fight my way through so what is this about? And the old way and the new way, and this is the Jewish tradition, and a lot of it was about circumcision. It was dense in terms of the biblical references of it. And as someone that finds himself very much outside that world, I was like, I'm not sure I don't even know where to start with this. I can't translate this for myself. So then what do I do? You know, like that.
Tell me. Yeah, well, no. Do you remember the very beginning of St John's Gospel is in the beginning was...
Seal it, there we go.
There we
That's
go.
presumed biblical knowledge.
Yeah.
You know the beginning of St John's Gospel.
I didn't
I've got it tattooed on my arm. No, what a ridiculous thing to say.
Well,
no,
I'm sure I bet you do.
Is.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. See?
And the something.
Yes.
Word was with God.
And that's a big yes, that's it. Well, see, and in the Greek, which is I don't know what the Hebrew is. I should, because I'm more Jewish than anything. But the Greek translation is logos, en he arche in the beginning, and to logos. I know I haven't to know that because I studied Greek, but in the beginning was the word. Logos is the word that we get logic from, and which is the logic is the sort of is stepping. This one thing makes sense to the next. It's like narrative, and actually logos. One of the means of logos is story. So instead of it being reductive, like in the beginning was the Word, and the Word of God is this thing that is absolutely unchangeable. Boom, that was the beginning. It's actually, if it's story, it's much freer, much more open.
Yes, and now see, I'm on board with that when it comes to things like the Passions. The Passions for me is easy because I think of it much more as acting. You're telling a story, you're inhabiting a character, inhabiting the thoughts of someone.
Yes.
But what happens if it's a mass or something which was originally had a liturgical function, which now you've brought into the concert hall? How do you do that? Because which role are you playing?
I think this is it. I think, Kate, you've put your absolute finger on it. As far as in my there's a humble opinion from my limited experience, that's exactly what you have to do. And acting, acting. Is about what we do to people. Act is do, and not feel. It's not what we feel. And when we do religious music, we tend to go a bit into the feeling thing. So that's why Zing at Dim Ham, for instance, is jolly. Dum dum ba da da dum. So we be jolly, zing and da 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 zing. And I think the interesting thing, and I think the thing that for me, just because I get to ask people to do things that I know I'm going to like. So it was much more interesting for me if people are there with a purpose that I think also has. Oh, thanks. Oh, lovely. And we're now eating. Is this? Yeah, we should make that clear for the listeners.
I think that's fine. People love eating.
We're allowed to.
Tom's having trout.
Yes, and
I'm having a side of lemon and something broccoli.
It looks extremely good, I must say.
Oops, I'm good. The green. Thanks.
Thanks. If you do, and I think that just opens up all sorts of really useful questions. That as we zing at Dim Ham, as we did, what and really helps. Technically, I think singing, because singing is an unusual activity. We don't sing all the time. It's not talking is a much more normal activity. But this isn't. We're not being asked to talk. We're asked to sing. And so, what is that action? Why are we even doing that? just because we're paid to, and just because Bach wrote it and someone has to sing it, so we'll step in just because we're told to. I mean, that's a bit dull, isn't it? I think it's really interesting and I think this ties in very clearly with when you're singing Mr. Solemnis. Why are we doing it? What is the role and as you say, in the John Passion, it's much more easy because we're either Pilate's wife, or we're in Matthew Passion, of course, but even the chorales, we know we're kind of congregational, or we're meditating on something. So there's a much clearer role. If we ask the same questions about the Mass, who are you talking to and what are you trying to do to them, then I think the questions of whether we believe or not, to go out the window because it doesn't matter. We've got a job to do.
I posed this question to our Solomon's Not sopranos, Zoe Brookshaw, and here, Clare Lloyd-Griffiths.
I think we can come at it from many different perspectives and backgrounds, because in a way what we think of it doesn't have any relevance at all. We're sort of vessels of this music. We can view it in that way. We're a vessel and we're delivering something that has been, written by a composer, and it's all there in the music and in the words, and we can deliver it in that way. Obviously, the more we dig into it and understand it, the more we'll connect to the performance.
Also, the audience, they've paid for a ticket. There's a contract there. They know who you are. They know what this is about, and it's kind of up to them how they receive it. But it's up to us to do our best to inhabit the music as best we can and the meaning of the words.
And then leave it to them as to what they take from it.
Yeah, I don't think we're pretending to be something we're not. We're not saying we are religious people and we mean this text. We are sort of, like Claire said, actually, we are a vessel, really, an intermediary between Bach and the audience. We're the people who deliver it, and we must endeavour to do that as best we can.
So maybe actually my whole question, which I did discuss with Tom, possibly, as well as it being really indulgent, is really generally self-indulgent. And it's that all the time I'm thinking about what is my experience of singing this, rather than how am I serving the composer to communicate something to an audience.
Yes, because you're very selfish.
The most valuable experience that this music can bring about is that which is experienced, I think, by the people who see everything. I mean, when I'm singing soprano, I mean, I'm really listening to everything that's going on, but I can never step out of it. No. I can never step out and see the full effect of this spectacle and all of those parts coming together. Although I think in Solomon's Not, we do get as close as we can. We're on the other side of the carpet. My singing teacher always used to say, we're like a tapestry. We're behind, but when you come out to the front, you see the whole thing.
But I think I really enjoy watching people on stage who really look like they mean it. And whether that comes from a place of actually meaning it or pretending to mean it, I don't really mind as long as it looks real Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I wonder that the thing I find special about Solemnus Not is there's this, and any other good performing, is the sense that we're experiencing something genuine together.
Yeah.
Come and experience it with us.
Of course.
Rather than you are the audience, this is what we're giving you. And it's kind of irrelevant how we feel about it, or it doesn't matter if it's not real to us or something. I think I like that version of it.
I totally agree.
Tom Guthrie again.
Just to add a random, I'm completely unprepared. If we took the creed, which is I believe in God, the Father Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth, that's an interesting one because that's a statement of personal belief, isn't it? I believe. So it starts with that. But why, if we ask the question, why are you singing it and why are you saying it right then? Maybe it's because you don't believe, or you need to convince other people to believe, or you're standing up and saying something really powerful and strong in order to quell your own doubts, or to maybe to you know.
But isn't it interesting? Because I remember when I was at university. I remember when I was at university, when I was going through my slightly aggressively angry stage, as I'm sure everyone does, I wouldn't say the creed.
No. Yes.
Because I felt like there was a great insincerity in, like, I'm not going to speak these words.
Yes.
Now I've definitely kind of squared that opinion. I'm kind of come to understand that it is your role to lead the congregation, all that kind of stuff. And I think I've just mellowed a bit on that. But I think it's something to do with the fact that I would sing those words for sure and not question it. But suddenly speaking it, it immediately felt there was a kind of layer of remove. So maybe when you're singing it, it adds some layer of kind of artifice that you're like, well, this is okay. Maybe the same thing as if you just also sing in another language. You know, whereas if you speak something English, it suddenly feels so you feel so vulnerable. You're saying something, you suddenly think, oh, I really believe this.
I asked Sheila Wilson whether she feels we can slip too far into the comfortable rhythm of religious texts and instead need to be constantly feeling or assessing them afresh.
Where is our attention when we're involved in liturgy? And I think it's very easy to switch off. And I think sometimes as well, if you're, and I don't know if this is true for musicians, but if you're doing more than one thing in a service, you can be concentrating so hard on your role, or perhaps the note, or what's coming ahead in the music, that your attention is not with what you're actually singing. And I think there's that balance, which in a way I would compare to something like driving. When it's automatic to us, we can almost forget that we've just driven a mile. But actually, it's really significant that our attention is on what we're doing, because otherwise we won't see something. And
do you ever find, maybe this is a ridiculous question, but do you ever find that you experience that? You know, you're saying these words which must have become a rhythm for you. Do you ever feel like suddenly you just feel them much more acutely or vividly than ever? Or do you ever find yourself thinking, now I'm in the rhythm of this is how it goes? Or do you try to say or feel the words afresh every time you do it, or you're not really aware of that?
I mean, if I put it for me in a prayer context, Michael Ramsey, who was the great Archbishop in mid-20th century, he used to talk about, somebody once asked him, how long did he pray for each morning? And he said, well, I'm there for half an hour, and I might have prayed for 1 minute. And what he was talking about, I think, was something of that quality of attention.
But even if one succeeds in singing, hearing or considering religious words afresh, is it still an uncomfortable situation to be so regularly saying things you simply don't believe?
You're there to move other people, aren't you? And it's not your job to worry about what you personally think, possibly.
Do you think that means this whole question, and I did worry this, it's just a big indulgence? It's like, well, it doesn't matter what you think. Just get on with it. Just sing your job. Like, just sing. Maybe I should worry less about, okay, this isn't how I feel, and kind of give myself in more to the sense of, okay, how did those people feel? When we were in Bern recently, we did the B minor mass, and they had this those beautiful carved like choir stalls, and also kind of the pews for the congregation, and they had these like amazing kind of names of who would have sat there, and I really love the sense of transporting yourself to that moment. It's probably why I like really nice old pubs, and thinking I'm transporting myself to being the person that's sitting in that congregation. And how would you feel, like when the Matthew Passion was done as part of, like there was a sermon in the middle or something, wasn't there? How would you feel receiving that information, particularly in a time whereby, religion was different. People were God-fearing, right? Their children died in huge numbers.
Yes.
It was a question of life and death and all the things of humanity in primary colours, in a way that it's also just a bit more kind of polite and nice, sort of nice, charming bit of evensong and then some supper,
Yes, and flower arranging.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas then it was big, bold stuff, when you say, Lord, have mercy upon me, you really
had to mean it.
Yeah. And in some ways I like the idea of translating yourself to being the audience and receiving that info and that text and that performance.
I discussed this with the Reverend Sheila Wilson, who is the preacher of the chapel at Lincoln's Inn, a place with an incredibly rich history, where previous preachers have included the poet John Donne.
I mean, you're making me think, I don't think I've ever sort of been in the chapel and sort of in my imagination people did in the way you're describing, and I'm just asking myself how far that's because I'd never want to compare myself with John Donne, but also whether we're talking Donne or whether we're talking other people. I mean, so many of them were men that it seems quite foreign to me, because the inn chapel would have been particularly reserved for people who during those ages were inevitably so. I think I do sometimes wonder whether it's about chapel here or elsewhere. I mean, the services, as you were saying, would have been very long, a number of them, and the question of audibility is an interesting one. And therefore, when we talk about attention and quality of attention in the way that we've been doing, just what that was like, and I think some of it would have been a very different kind of activity, and a bit of me wishes I could go back in history and discover that. I think what does always speak to me is that sense of place, whether it's in the inn or whether it's somewhere else, and it's a different sense of place according to where you are, but that's where you might say I'm being fanciful, but where you can sort of tell a building that has been prayed in and worshipped in. It's in the stones, it's in the fabric, and I think I certainly feel that's there in the chapel here.
Back in the pub with Tom.
I think that's wonderful. I think that all that can really help too. And I like you. I mean, I loved long evensongs in November with long psalms, beautiful psalm chants, and only about 4 or 5 people there, and it's big dark, and the big candles, and all that beauty and peace and sanctuary, but also time and sort of space and those things. We were just talking about being Quakers, weren't we? And how that going somewhere where you might be silent for a whole hour is a wonderful idea. But that it is. I mean, in a sense, it's spirituality, isn't it? It's not about religion. It's about having the time to connect with yourself, and also a sense of gratitude to nature, the world.
It's funny because people often say to me, one of my students in fact said to me in a lesson, I was talking to him about this, and he said, yeah, in the moment I feel religious. And I was like, well, what does that mean? He said, well, it's nothing to do with believing in God. And I was like, well, what is it then? He said, for me, sometimes I have this moment of kind of epiphany or whatever it is. I have this moment, I think, gosh, life just suddenly feels technicolor. And it's because I'm experiencing singing a piece of music in close proximity to other people, and the kind of real special quality of sharing that with other people. Does that make sense? And I kind of feel like, is that religion? Well, what is that? Some people say, like, what is spirituality? Is it like kind of hippie dream catchers and eating lentils? I mean, I don't know. Or is it something about, I just feel life very vividly for a second?
And being in the present, and things like meditation, and things like,
Don't do that constantly for 10 minutes, but
No, exactly. Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think it's probably a different thing for different people, of course, but it's in terms of going back to singing and meaning it and feeling that connection with yourself while you do it, I think I probably am in the belief that there's a discipline about what we do, which means it is a bit indulgent in terms of the literalness of religion versus, the stuff that we can't, that most people I suspect now, and probably even if they are full of faith and full of certain religious beliefs, can probably understand because of the world we live in. The idea that there's the things that we can't stomach maybe are not the point. This idea of imagination, this idea of story, it's not a question of whether God is real, in a sense. It's a fact of our human nature that we will make our own, or we will make gods. In other words, there's a kind of imaginative level going on where we'll tell stories and we'll make a myth of it.
Like during the pandemic, I had this really strong sense of this idea all the time, particularly in Bach, of the kind of the tussle between good and evil, and I kind of feel that all the time in life is this kind of tussle between being distracted towards really annoying things which just exist all the time in life. Like, I'm very smug about not being on social media, but social media and an obsession with like what people look like and like consumer goods and like being on trend with all that stuff. I just have unbearable bullshit. And I love the sense of I'm just going to push that to the side and really think carefully about what I consider to be good and valuable in life. And I really feel like that is exactly the religious dichotomy that people are struggling with all the time in all the music we kind of talk about. It's just that my version of it is, come on, just go to the woods and read a book. Don't spend your time on social media worrying what everyone else is looking like and whether you're quite the right shade of orange or whatever it is you're supposed to be. And I kind of do feel that really acutely, that it's possible to find your own version of those things.
Yeah, and then that maybe those things are translatable. I mean, even if, for instance, let's go back to the Creed, and you're singing Missa Solemnis, and you're thinking, well, I don't believe in God, so I'm going to have to now sing Credo in unum Deum. Is it in Latin? I don't even know that piece very well. I'm ashamed to say. Yeah, Credo in unum Deum, blah blah. And you, in other words, you're speaking in the first person, and you're thinking to yourself, but I don't mean this. Is it translatable in the sense that, as a role, you're singing something which is very personal, and it's about, I am committing to an understanding that there's something outside of me, which could be, I think your nature idea is ideal. I mean, I can really see that working. That's outside of me that I need to engage with.
In fact, after our performance of the Beethoven Missa Solemnis, John Eliot directed me to a scribbled note on a piece of manuscript paper from 1812, in which Beethoven wrote, "To the Almighty One of the woods, where every tree speaks through thee, O God, what glory in the woodland! In the heights is peace, peace to serve him." So one can quite imagine that somewhere between his Freemasonry and lapsed Catholicism, Beethoven might have even made this translation or found this resonance himself.
I was thinking, when do you consider that you know a piece of music? Right, so I learned the notes, right? I can learn the notes pretty quickly, like I'm going to sing the right syllables in the right place, I'm going to get roughly the right notes. Okay, so that's one level of learning.
Very glad to hear it.
Then I memorise it, so there's a lot of kind of self-congratulation about, oh my God, you guys sing by memory. Yeah, that's one thing, but it's really about spending time with a piece, really. That's what it really translates to.
Right.
And then there's another level of learning, which is, okay, I can sing it by heart, but do I really understand it? What am I thinking when I'm singing it? Yeah. If I'm just thinking, okay, 2 beats until the soprano entry, 3 beats until the tenor entry, well, then do I really know it?
Yeah.
Do I need to know it to kind of a greater depth than that? And I love the sense that, the more you think you know something, and then you don't know it at all.
Yes.
I've sung the Matthew Passion by heart, I'm preparing it to do it at Solomon's Knot, and I don't know it at all. There's things I think, well, what does this fit in? How does this chorale, what's the context of this chorale? Why am I singing this after the previous moment? It's like kind of taunting that the more you think you know it, you realise, I've got no idea. I can sing it technically by heart and put all the right words and in the right place and all the right notes around this. I can even know the translation absolutely bang on note to note. I still don't really feel I know it, and then I can read. I can almost kind of analyse it, which I tend to do as a kind of way of memorising it, and then I can read around. I spend my life looking up. So I've got 78 multihits. Spend my life looking up things of like, what does it mean when it says the daughters of Zion? Why are they daughters? Why are they daughters? And why is Christ always a bridegroom? What is that always? What is that about? Why are we singing that all the time and not really thinking, what? You know?
We just sing it.
We just like, oh yeah, sure, yeah. It's the Christ the bridegroom thing. Yeah. You're like, what?
Yeah.
Whereas you see, when you come from my background, which is one which is very much out of this world of presumed knowledge, you're thinking, what? I remember, what are all these assumed things that we're just so used to talking about, and why aren't we kind of questioning them?
Well,
and not to say that we consider them to be wrong in any way, but just that we haven't thought more carefully about what we're trying to convey. You know?
Well, I love all that. I mean, I think it's so important that one keeps questioning, and I think it's the absolute answer to. It's curiosity again, isn't it? But it's the absolute answer to any kind of modern performance, to ask the questions, because it has to be new every time, and you have to refresh it, because for the audience it's that moment when you're all in the same place and there's this communion with each other on the stage, but also with the audience, and this energy exchange and this coming together. So and I think that's the absolute thing, and that's where I think the role thing in the action, what are you doing and who are you talking to and what you're trying to do to them, is such a useful key. Because once you start to ask those sort of questions, there's so many potential answers that can change, and the context of it, like why would, and this for me, this acknowledgement of singing as well. Why not even to take that for granted? Not even just that we've got this text. What does it mean, the bridegroom of the church, whatever it might be. This idea that you're not reading it, you're singing it. So what does that mean? Let's not take that for granted. Let's not.
What did singing mean for people? Like the Lutheran chorale context of like singing together, doing something together.
Well, I think the historical sort of context of singing is really interesting. But even just the prime, what human? Why do we? If I want to communicate to you, Kate, I'm not going to go, what are you having for pudding? I'm not going to do that unless.
I wish you were.
Yeah.
Lasset uns den nicht zerlassen, lasset uns den nicht zerlassen.
And when we question the motivation of singing these religious texts, do we also need not to forget that those that had a previously liturgical function would have existed in quite a different way?
It's a mass, but it's incomplete, because mass is not being said or celebrated, and therefore it's a partial activity, but the meaning you want to communicate relates to the whole. And therefore I do think that's something complex. I think if you take a passion, that's slightly different, because though it would be within the context of a service like Palm Sunday or Good Friday, it is still an entire bit in itself. It's not that you're taking parts, settings, parts of, and therefore and it is a drama. It is the drama of the Passion, and therefore to my mind, I would expect that to be easier. And in a way, if I go to hear something like that, I think I'd probably find that easier to enter into it in a spiritual context.
That's interesting. I was going to ask you, maybe this is impossible to answer, but do you receive the music differently if it's in the church, whether it's in a concert hall? Do you feel like you're aware of it?
I think what's true is that I go to it with a different expectation. But it's quite complicated because there are all these differences between when I'm leading a service, when I'm in the congregation, and each of them makes a difference. Never mind, what have you just been doing and how are you feeling and how recollected are you when you come in and sit down. So I think that's a subject in its own right, in a way.
Of course, yeah. But, okay, so answer me this. So, I did a Messiah with Alex Ashworth, SK bass baritone?
Yeah.
Not sure.
I'm a little bit delighted with that.
Before Christmas. It's just gone up in the world. And someone came up to him afterwards and he'd sung, all of the classic bass arias and maybe, the trumpet shell sound. And she said to him, I see in your eyes, you know God. Yes, I see that you know God. Yeah. And the way you sing and the way you put the text across, you know God. And of course, Alex went, I suppose so. Maybe a little cute.
Yes.
I think possibly. And I was like, it's almost like he'd been so fervent in putting his text across. And then actually, when someone said, "And do you believe this?" I felt like he'd been caught out. And do you see what I mean about the insincerity of that? Is if you were an actor, Zoe said to me, you don't have to be a serial killer to be Sweeney Todd.
Yes.
Yeah, there's absolutely that. But there's a sense that do people forget that when you are singing a religious text?
Well, it's terrific if they do, isn't it? Because then you have done your part well. I mean, I think that's right. I think...
I'm uncomfortable with that, the playing the part thing.
I know, especially with religious things, right? Because there's... I mean, I get that, but I don't think there's a way around it. Because you can't suddenly become religious and say, I believe in one God, and say, I've got to believe that, otherwise I'm a bullshitter, and I'm really insincere, and I'm a fraud.
I think it's also, it really taps into my hatred of artful bullshit. It's like I say most in my lessons to my students, I say, so, what does that line mean? And they're like, I think it's something to do with flowers. You're like, no. What does that word mean? I don't know. Well, then it's artful bullshit.
Yeah.
And we have all been so well trained in it. Yeah. And I feel like you have to let it quietly dissolve out your life. If the older you become and the more hopefully thoughtful you become.
Yes.
It's like, I think particularly kind of the English choral tradition, we're so good at artful bullshit. I mean, I can do quite a negative impression of it. I know roughly it's, the affect. Yes. What is the affect? The affect is kind of a bit sad, possibly hopeful, whatever it is,
Yes.
And whereas actually, I hate that.
Yeah.
It's the one thing I like about Solomon's Knot is I feel like that layer of artful bullshit of, we can do quite a good impression of this.
Yes.
Dissolves because we will have to spend a lot of hours learning it. So you feel like, no, I really know this. But then now my problem is I feel like, that makes me realise I don't know it at all.
No, I love that about you guys as well, and I think and knowing some of you individually as well, I think that's a real you're a thoughtful group, you don't let things just go by the wayside. I think that's absolutely brilliant, and I think. And that's why it was such a pleasure to work with you, because I think, everything you're saying is what I think we need to do. The only thing I would say slightly different to what you're saying, I think, if it's interesting, is this element of not just what. I think that you probably mean this as well, but with the artful bullshit, it's a bit like word painting, for instance, and you get the word Schwarz in it, and I've got one that I was working with another group, I think Fragilini it might have been, and there was this, I think it was German. It was anyway. It meant black, and so they were colouring it in black, and it's often the way, isn't it? You get the word love, and you go love, or you get the word death.
What happens if you do the opposite?
Yeah. Well, yeah. What happens if you do the opposite? But also, you really just have to ask them what question. Again, who are you talking to? Why are you saying it? So you might be saying, there is only release in death. So you never say. In other words, you're reassuring someone. You never say there's only release in death. That's nonsense. You wouldn't do it, but somehow we do it if we feel we're being expressive. Sometimes when in music we go sterben because you think that's expressive, and that is artful bullshit for me as well. You've got to ask who. I think it's really simple. You ask who you're talking to and what you're trying to do to them. And then you get multiple answers, and they can change.
So, am I putting too much pressure on my own belief? And should I concern myself solely with what I'm able to communicate? I asked Solomon's Knot sopranos, Zoe and Clare. Because I know that both of you are in the scale of being, totally not from a religious world at all, to something that, even if at some stage of your life felt that you might have been quite a religious person, we're all, and I think the whole of Solomon's not really on quite different places on that scale. So do either of you feel like it's something you've thought about before or been uncomfortable with before or not?
I don't ever feel uncomfortable with that, especially in a concert, because I feel different about singing it in concerts to singing it in services. I think the only place I ever maybe feel a bit duplicit is if I'm leading worship.
Okay.
And I maybe this is something you might talk to Sheila about, but I think it's different when you're being paid in both of those scenarios, but in the concert hall or even in a church when it's a concert, as I said, there's an understanding between you and the audience. They know who you are and why you're there, and vice versa. And therefore, I feel it's when I say it's my job, that sounds kind of trivial, or like I wouldn't care about the material, which isn't the case at all. But there's an understanding there.
It's always been my experience of church and of the brand of Christianity that I come from, Catholicism, that all are welcome in a way, and in the sense that churches they're very welcoming places. Everyone's very welcome to come, because you can't convert someone unless they come through the door in the first place. I feel like that I've always been quite comfortable with the idea that there's room there for everyone, and sometimes people go up for communion and sometimes they don't. That's their own decision.
You don't have to have a membership card, do you? You don't have a membership
card. Everyone can come along. You don't have to be baptised to be there. You don't have to believe to be there. You can just be there. And
that is quite wonderful, really, isn't it?
It's quite a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
And maybe this is too broad, but I want to ask it anyway. Okay, so you're talking about who are you talking to and what are you trying to do to them? How do you feel about the relevance? That's quite a tricky big word nowadays, isn't it? The relevance of doing really specifically, music, Baroque music, religious music,
yes.
When one wants to appeal to, maybe you don't want to appeal, maybe you're like, well, this is what we do, tough, but like to appeal to a wider audience,
Who doesn't want to be reassured? Who isn't anxious at some point? Who doesn't feel an energy coming from go back to the example of du jour, if you love me, if you came up and you wanted, the fact that the performers are trying to reassure you, it doesn't matter at all whether they tick the box and what did you get from that? Oh, I felt reassured, job done. They take whatever they want from it, but what it will be is it'll have integrity, and
maybe that's what we need to think about in terms of the audience. Don't worry about whether your audience are religious or not. Just offer them something and see what they take from it.
Yes, absolutely. But to do that, I think the best way to do that convincingly is that you have to get a level of integrity about what you sing, which goes back to your original question, right? How do you feel integrity? And it goes back to Alex Ashford singing "Trumpets Shall Sound." He clearly achieved that in that moment. Then the question is how do we achieve it? And that's what that's what our job, that's what my job is, and your questions, I mean, that's what it's all about. How do you do it in any one situation so that people can take something genuine from it that touches them? I think that's really important for all the storytelling. Don't tell people what to think.
Clare and Zoe again.
Can we sometimes get too involved in the process and actually imposing ourselves on the music making too much, and then it becomes about us, whereas it really should be about the music and the words and the drama. And
when I was struggling with my performance anxiety a few years back, someone's therapist said to me very helpfully, again, what we were talking about, just imagine yourself as a vessel, i.e. you're sort of inherently unimportant, and that's just a way of removing yourself from the situation, just to kind of say, okay, well, I'm just here, it's my voice, but you can kind of float above your body a bit and be a bit removed from it. I think that's a really helpful tool to help you get through that kind of experience. Equally, I don't know, I think there's something joyful as an audience member about watching people do something where they feel emotionally grounded and secure, and whether that's communicating joy or a deep sorrow, I don't know, I think there has to be an integrity there of emotion, of what you're feeling, and I don't know, but sometimes you don't feel it, do you?
But do any of these questions really make a difference to how we perform the music?
But I was having this thought as well because I stupidly suggested, I can't remember, that I sing Ebamadic when we're doing the Mackie Passion. Ridiculous moment of confidence, which I immediately regretted. And I thought, no, because I always avoid the kind of big, famous numbers. And I was like, no, I won't do that. I'll do that random other little aria that no one's ever heard of. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And then I was kind of panicking with this sense of, okay, it's got to be really perfect. Yeah. It's got to be really poised. Yeah. It's got to be, I've got to be in my head this sense of these kind of beautiful countertenors soaring over an endless line where they never breathe. Yeah. And I was suddenly like, well, actually, maybe what people might like as an alternative is something which feels very human and it feels very raw, and maybe it's not perfect and it's a bit kind of broken biscuits around the corners, but it's meaningful, and actually maybe I need to obsess less about the perfection of things. It's like, what are we aiming for? Just to dutifully, perfectly there you go, can't even pronounce the word, perform something, or do we want a kind of rendering of the piece which feels honest and emotional, and is that okay? I mean, you don't want to be a big old mess, do you?
Just
stop with 2 glasses of wine. But but is there a sense that it's okay that it's not perfect, and maybe that's
100%. I mean, of course. I mean, I totally agree with that. And the question still remains a bit how. And to me, that, in other words, for Ebamadic, I think it's really important to me that to me personally, but I think I would say to an audience, for a genuine experience that isn't like they're recording and never was supposed to be, and they get it because it's got integrity and it's got real meaning. How do you do that? Well, you need to absolutely be asking whoever you've decided to be asking for release, and so it's much more. I think that's the secret to it working is the same questions, which by the way sound really pat and sort of like reductive, but I've come out of my entire experience of. I mean, that's what I ended up thinking. Well, actually, you could reduce it to these two questions that quite opening up. I know you say that because you probably ask those questions a lot, but strangely, we don't ask them a lot. No. We kind of go, okay, wait a minute, have I memerised my semi-quavers and I come in after you, whenever, and actually sometimes we miss the big questions. Yes.
of what am I trying to ask you to do?
Yes.
Or what do I want from you? Or
yes. What am I trying to? Yes.
Yeah,
how am I
what
trying
is
to
it?
change you?
Yeah, and actually I think that's why I like it. That's why I described your
Yes.
kind of approach to things as raw, because it's like get straight to it.
Yeah.
You know, to get all of that kind of dusty historical knowledge that you kind of need to know and then immediately forget. Like, what is it that you want from this?
But at the
And I
risk
think
of
that's-
sounding sort of, mutually self-congratulatory, I think that's what I love about what your question is. As also, genuinely, how do you do it so that it's got integrity and it's got meaning? I mean, I think it's and the artful bullshit and wanting to get away from that. I think it's absolutely it's exciting, because that's exactly what should be happening and is the route to. And it's interesting, like you said. I mean, I think we all really struggle with that.
At the same time that I'm convinced with the argument that music needs more purpose than just beauty, sometimes I wonder that perhaps entertainment isn't a dirty word. Maybe it's okay that a piece of music, particularly one with an originally religious intention, becomes simply a thing of beauty to admire and enjoy, or becomes something whose meaning has transformed totally and acquires a whole new context among its modern audience. Zoe Brookshaw here.
But there's also a sense that is that not the function or the role of art, of music, is to actually not be all about the words and the meaning and the actual theology. Like, part of art and music is experiential and just listening to or watching something beautiful.
Yes, and what people say about music is that's what music takes over where words
exactly
end.
And there's a truth in that. And I think, I don't hope I'm not putting words into Bach's mouth, but I think he would have felt that's part of his duty as a composer is, to the glory of God, and this actually is almost an end in itself. Like the beauty of the music is something religious or spiritual in some way. There's, art has that function, a transcendental quality in and of itself, perhaps. Right?
Back in the pub with Tom.
And it's the curse of the recording a bit, isn't it? That we know these they've become hits, and we love them. We love that counter-Nestorian thing because it works.
Well, we did a piece recently in a programme, and it was like, oh yeah, we know this one, it's the Nunc Dimittis. I was
Yes.
like, okay, great. Immediately that's comfortable. I was
Yeah.
like, wait a minute.
Yes.
Lord, now let us let thy servant depart in peace
Yes,
according to
please let me
from
go.
my eyes. And I kind of think we've got to continually refresh these things in our heads,
Yes.
like we're saying them for the first time.
Yes.
And it's just when when you don't do that and you slip into kind of just being comfortable and not really thinking about it, then it becomes just a bit.
Yes, and everything we're talking about, I think it's the gift that keeps giving, because it's always it's always going to make it much more fun and much more interesting, much more interesting. And the other great thing about this, which we obviously don't want to, towards the end of the conversation, we don't want to get overly academic, but I think there is this whole history of the influence of rhetoric, things like Renaissance things, where the composer doesn't write very much detail, doesn't say allegro con brio, and this metronome mark and this crescendo and rubato here and the rit here. They don't do that. They just put the notes down, and the reason is that the whole system of their education and the way that they communicate and the way they analyse their communication, the way there was clearly the writer has a certain amount of responsibility and the performer has, and literally in classical terms, half the responsibility. And in other words, the performer has to ask the questions. If you do Handel without asking the
I feel the
questions,
weight of that responsibility, right?
yeah, well, good.
It's so
good.
much easier, wouldn't it? If
Yes.
just tell you exactly how to do it, exactly, you just have to exactly.
Yes, it would. But I know you well enough to know that would bore the pants off you, Kate.
There are so many more branches to this discussion that I'd like to consider. What would it feel like to sing in a synagogue? What does it feel like for someone of a totally different world religion to sing within the Christian musical world? Is that really happening very often? What does it feel like for an instrumentalist to play a religious piece? Is that a clearly different experience to something secular? If we were to compare the experience of singing Bach's religious settings with those in which he later reused the same music but with secular texts, would we find a clear way to assess if there's a difference in our performance, our experience? I'll have to leave those questions and many others left hanging for future discussion. But having gathered these thoughts, I've returned to my original question. What I've discovered is that I'm arguably indulging massively in concerns about the integrity and the sincerity of my own experience. Instead, perhaps I should feel more that I'm serving either the audience, the composer, the music itself, the experience. And perhaps I should allow myself to wallow in that uncomfortable grey, muddy area where it's not a binary question of do I believe what I'm saying or not. Maybe the shades and nuances are where lie all of the joy. To finish, some particularly wise words from my wonderful colleagues, Zoe and Clare.
It never bothered me that it might not be true. It was more, what can we take from this? In the same way that a myth, I accept that as not factual, but still a good story, and it may impart meaning.
And that sort of ultimate acceptance of our humanity is at the heart of I think religious practice, or should be, and it's something that I feel also during our concerts.
And maybe also striving for not perfection, but striving always to be better and to make what you're doing a worthy offering for whomever, whatever. Yes. I think that's a really important part of what it is to be a human and what it is to be a performer as well. And we're always just trying our best, and I think that's really important. Yeah.